So this section, section 2.1, is all about relations and functions. And it's actually easier than it sounds. A relation is basically a mapping of numbers. So let's look at a real life example. Let's say that today I decide to open a burger restaurant. And on day one of my restaurant, I sell 3 burgers. So the first day I opened, I immediately sold 3 burgers. And I'm going to write that as 1, 3, where this first number here, the 1, represents the day, and the second number represents the number of burgers sold. And so let's say on day 2, I sell 5 burgers. And let's say on day 3, I sell 5 burgers again. And on day 4, I manage to sell 6 burgers. And so these right here, these are actually known as the ordered pairs that represent this relation. And this relation is the relation between the days and the number of burgers sold. And that's basically it. That's what an ordered pair is. Now, there are more ways to represent a relation. The first is what we just saw, which is right here, the ordered pair. But you can actually do it in other ways too. And the other ways are almost just as simple as an ordered pair. So to give you an example, the second way you can write a relation is by putting it into a table. And so for a table, basically you write x for the first number, this first number here. You write y for the second number, these second numbers here. And then you kind of just copy over all the x's and copy over all the y's. So for example, the first x here is the number 1. I'm going to copy it over. The first y is the number 3. I'm going to copy that over. The second x here is the number 2. The second y is 5. The third one here, that's 3 and 5. And then the fourth one here, that's 4 and 6. And that's it. I've represented my relation as a table. Now there's something to keep in mind here. In this ordered pair, this first number is often known as x, and this second number is often known as y. But there are also other names for it. So sometimes the first number is known as x, but other times in your book or elsewhere, they'll call this first number or this first set of numbers the domain, and they'll call the y set of numbers the range. And then it gets even more complicated than that. Sometimes they'll call the x the domain, they'll call that the input. And then they'll call the y the range, they'll call that the output. And so it can be called a number of things. You can get x, domain, or input, and they're all talking about the same thing. They're all talking about this first number in the ordered pair. Or you can have y, range, and output, and that's talking about the same thing. It's talking about the second number in the ordered pair. And so you have to keep that in mind. And so far we've covered 2 ways to represent a relation. The first is the ordered pair, the second is the table, and now it gets a little more complicated. The third way to represent a relation is really fun, and it's through graphing the points. And this is really straightforward. You basically just graph all of the ordered pairs onto the graph. And you might already know this, but on a graph you have these 2 axes. This is called the x-axis, and this one's the y-axis. And over here, x goes from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, till forever. And then on the left side, it goes -1, -2, -3, -4, till negative infinity. And then on the y-axis, you have the same thing, except it's up and down. So y equals 0 is in the center, then it goes to 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. And then as it goes down, it goes to -1, -2, -3, so on and so forth. And so you know these ordered pairs here, these are actually x, y. And so what we want to do now is just find each point on the graph and graph it. And so let's do that. The first point is 1, 3. So that's x is 1 and y is 3. So I'm going to come over here to x is 1, and then I'm going to go up 1, 2, 3 to y equals 3. And color that in, and there you have that first point, 1, 3. Then the second point is 2, 5. I do the same thing. I come to x equals 1, 2, and then up to y equals 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I do the same thing for 3, 5, the third point, where I go to x equals 3 and y equals 5, color that in. And then the last point, 4, 6, x equals 4 and y equals 6, and color that in. And then you're done. You've graphed all the points in that ordered set on the graph. Easy peasy. The last way to represent a relation, and this one is probably the most tricky, is called a mapping diagram. So that's mapping diagram. And you may have seen these before, but it's basically there's an x, there's a y, and then there's two big ovals that are drawn under the x and the y. And this is actually very similar to a table. So remember when we did the table, we took all the x's and put them under x. We took all the y's and put them under y. And we're going to do the same thing here, except with one major difference. And the major difference is when you're drawing a mapping diagram, you have to ignore the repeats. And that's the one rule of a mapping diagram. So let's do this example and you'll understand a little better. The x's are 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can see them right here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. There were no repeated x's, so I wrote it all here. Now the y's are 3, 5, 5, and 6. So you can see there are two 5's here. The 5's were repeated. So I'm actually going to ignore one of the 5, and I'm just going to put 3, 5, 6. So instead of writing out 3, 5, 5, 6, I've just written 3, 5, 6. And so on the mapping diagram for x, I have 1, 2, 3, 4. But for y, I only have 3, 5, 6 because I ignored that repeating 5. Now, this is the fun part. Basically, you just draw arrows between the pairs to represent them. So in the first one, where we have 1, 3, I'm going to draw an arrow going from the 1 to the 3. For 2, 5, I'm going to draw an arrow going from the 2 to the 5. For 3, 5, I'm going to draw an arrow going from the 3 to the 5. And then for 4, 6, same thing, going to draw an arrow from the 4 to the 6. And you can see why repeats are not needed. Both 2 and 3 can have their arrows point to 5, and so you don't really need to write the 5 twice. And that's it. There you have it, the mapping diagram. Those are the 4 ways to represent relations. First is the ordered pair, second is the table, third is a graph, and fourth is the mapping diagram.